In the meantime, Ben, let's welcome you to the programme. And of course, overnight, we've had a major fire in Dagenham in another tower block, apparently. But you've got a segment on what's happening in that part of London.
Absolutely, yes. Hello, everybody. Fantastic to be here as ever. And there has been a fire in Dagenham overnight, and it looks like a serious one. Luckily, not too many people hurt, but it certainly is. It bears a resemblance, shall we say, to what happened at Grenfell, with some cladding on a tower block going up in flames. Luckily, many more people were able to escape this one, and we'll see how that develops. And it is almost certainly linked in some way to what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk a bit about what's been happening in Barking and Dagenham, particularly as it relates to the council. And I'm going to talk about a report that was issued a few weeks back by Demos, who we have been talking about quite a bit, and we're going to continue to talk about quite a bit because they are the most influential think tank in the country right now. Absolutely. As we've spoken about previously, they were founded in 1994 by Sir Jeff Mulgan, who I spoke about last week. They used to share an office with Common Purpose. And they sit right in the heart of this idea of social and democratic innovation, and in particular, public-private partnerships and this fascist marketplace, which is essentially what appears to be the new Labour government's idea of what an economic system should be. Right? And actually, I think it's extraordinarily dangerous once you dig into the detail of it and you look at what's actually happening behind the scenes. So the report was called "Only We Can Save the State: Lessons from National Government from Public Service Reform in Barking and Dagenham." It was written by this fella, Chris Naylor, who is currently a managing director of a public service consultancy called Inner Circle, and he was actually the chief executive of the London Borough of Barking and Dagenham from 2014 to 2021. And they talk about it in absolutely glowing terms. So this idea that Barking and Dagenham, a place that could be absolutely everywhere. And they see this as a model for how local and national governance should run, right? And as I say, this is an extremely influential think tank, so we really should be paying attention to what they're saying here. So what is Barking and Dagenham? It's a London borough in the southeast of the city, population of around 220,000 people. And it's most known for or certainly up until recent decades, the existence of the Ford motor plant, which opened in 1931 and was a huge industrial asset for the nation. It employed around 58,000 workers at its peak and provided a real bedrock for the local community. It was a place where they could create wealth and prosperity, get job satisfaction, build self-reliance for themselves and their families. And it was a huge industrial asset, as I said, for the nation, building about 11 million cars and 39 million engines over a period of about 60 years. But since the turn of the century, production has crashed, supply chains have moved overseas, and from its peak of 58,000 people working there, it now employs just 2,000 people at that plant. And that has completely transformed the borough. Right, and its ability to generate revenue and to sustain and to govern itself ultimately. And we've also seen an enormous demographic transformation of the borough as well. So in 2001, 89% of the population identified as being white British, and just 10 years later, by 2011, that had reduced to 48%. Identifying as white British. So that's a nearly 40% drop in native population due to deindustrialization, but also ultimately to mass immigration. Now, in 2006, and this is why this is so interesting, if you think about the current context, what's going on in the country, in 2006, the BNP made an astonishing series of gains on the local council. They had 12 councillors elected to the local council. This certainly threw the cat amongst the pigeons, amongst the media elites and the liberal intelligentsia. Obviously, all of this was to do with lies and distortions, according to the Independent, nothing to do with deindustrialization and mass immigration. You have to pull all that stuff aside and ignore it. It was a huge focus for organisations like Hope Not Hate and The Guardian, and you can see here Billy Bragg, this is in 2010, chest beating in The Guardian, talking about the fact that a huge victory had been won by the anti-fascists against the far-right fascists of the BNP. All of this, I'm sure, sounding very familiar. If you've been paying attention to anything that's been happening in the country over the past few weeks, then all of this stuff, I think, will certainly resonate with you, right? And how did they do that? Well, one of the ways that they did it was by flooding the borough with activists from outside of the borough. I think this is the most important thing up front to note, right? Is that you've got a lot of very well-backed anti-fascist activists who were very happy to go in and dedicate their time and their resources to pushing back against what, frankly, were the expressed needs and concerns of the local people. Right, the BNP won those council seats. There's no insinuation, I don't think, that they cheated in any way. But the Liberal left, the people who very much are representative of the current administration of government didn't want to hear that, didn't like that at all. So they campaigned and pushed back, and they won back the borough. They also then embarked on two parallel streams of activity, really quite substantial things. The first one was about completely reorganising the council. Right. So the first thing that they talk about is this idea of community solutions. I'm going back to the report now. And this was about rethinking Barking and Dagenham. What do we actually do? How do we organise ourselves around the needs of citizens? Right. And this is how they were previously organised. So this is a siloed industrial model where if you're a citizen and you need to go to children's services, you'll have to go in and speak to them and give them your information, and you'll have a completely distinct identity on their systems. They won't know who you are before you walk through the door. And if you go to the library or you go to the debt and money service, you'll have to do the same thing over and over again. Right? So that's a very inefficient way of running things. And thankfully, because of digital technology, we're able to address this. We can have a single point of access for council services. It's been a big part of how they've transformed service delivery. So they talk about this use of data, effective use of data, can identify struggling households and offer proactive, tailored support to help boost their incomes before they hit crisis point. Right? So they're using all this technology and a reorganisation of council services to, unfortunately, the build is already built. I'm sorry about that. But essentially, they've got a model which shows how they've used technology and a data platform to transform the way that they interact with local people. And some of that has been beneficial, but actually I think a lot of it is quite sinister. If you look at this quote here, I think it's quite telling. So if you think about it basically says that some of the engagement that we were doing through this process of digitization was carefully curated and embedded into formal pathways, but more often than not, it was organic and deeply human. My favorite example was the WhatsApp group established by a member of the triage team to support young single mums who were in debt. This colleague had noticed that some of the mums were starting to offer each other support. On asking them more, she learned that for many young women, talking to other young women who had had similar experiences and had found a route to successfully managing her debt was one of the best sources of advice and support. So what you're looking at here is a bureaucrat in the council coming to the startling revelation, because of some research, that people help their friends out with advice and they have conversations with each other. But obviously we can't allow that to happen without the council being involved, without the professionals being involved, which is how they talk about themselves. So they have to create a WhatsApp group to insert themselves into that process. But obviously, and then the solutions that we offer are all going to be council solutions, ultimately paid for by the taxpayer, right? Because that's ultimately who is running this thing. So it have had a big impact, right? So they saved £5 million a year in baseline costs, which is what digital does, right? It strips out a whole load of back end cost, so it makes it much more efficient to deliver services. There are a whole bunch of other things in there that they say were positives. I'm not completely convinced that that's the case. And in parallel with this, they were also running this thing called Be First. So there was a transformation of council services on the one hand, but then also they've established this new entity, what they call a growth and regeneration company. And this is wholly owned by the council. It's focused on regeneration and development. It was launched in 2018. And it was about increasing the pace and scale of growth in the borough and doing it in a way that benefited citizens, but funded by the council and delivering revenues and profits back to the council. Right? So this is essentially a public-private partnership which the council is using to fund its own operations, effectively in perpetuity. I mean, that's the game that they're trying to play here. They've got a load of things going on all around the borough. There's 45 projects. All of this is about regeneration and property development and new energy type projects, right? And absolutely none of it is to do with building real proper industries like the Ford plant, which was actually the source of wealth and prosperity for the community. It's been extraordinarily successful. They actually say that it's exceeded their 10.3 million per annum revenue, but they don't say by how much. It does sound like this has now become bigger than the council. And so you've got this public-private partnership that is bigger than the council. And they talk about it in these terms of becoming equals with development capital. Yeah, so they're actually operating as equal partners with development capital. I mean, that literally is the definition of public-private partnership. That is this fascist marketplace that we're talking about. And it's not going to deliver growth. And this is the most important thing to talk about here. So, and it's not just happening in Barking Dagenham, it's all around the country. It's also in Waltham Forest, in Walthamstow, near where I am. And I'm going to just talk very quickly about this Blackhorse Lane development, just to wrap this up, to just explain to you what I'm talking about. This used to be a big industrial park, and it's now been redeveloped into a bunch of flats. And that warehouse on the left, that's an asset. That is something that you can use to produce wealth. And what we have on the right was replaced it. And what these council schemes are doing, this is what they're building, that's a liability, right? Because that is a buy-to-rent scheme built by Legal and General and BlackRock, where we've replaced industrial capacity that actually produces wealth for the nation with a bunch of flats that no one will ever be able to buy, that will deliver money back to the investors, including to the local councils, who will then use that to fund their operations. And this is basically the philosophy that is driving all major economic decisions across the country right now.
Yes, you'll own nothing, be happy, Ben. Thank you for that. So